Hey guys, tonight we're unraveling one of history's greatest mysteries, why Victorian fashion was so bizarre. Not just a little quirky bizarre, but the kind of strange that makes you wonder if the entire 19th century was involved in some kind of elaborate inside joke that no one ever explained to the rest of us. We're talking about a world where women squeezed themselves into steel and whalebone cages, men wore hats large enough to serve as backup apartments, and getting dressed could require the strength of a small rugby team. This was the golden age of overdressing, 17 layers minimum, emotional repression included, and every outfit screamed, "Please respect me, I haven't breathed properly since breakfast." So before you get smothered, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your favorite absurd piece of fashion, and let us know if you've ever tried wearing a corset for more than 5 minutes. Now, dim the lights, switch on your fan, get comfortable, and maybe grab a blanket, but not too many layers. You'll see why soon. Now let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to walk around in 14 pounds of petticoats? Or why anyone would willingly balance a hat the size of a roast turkey on their head? Could you survive a day with your waist compressed to the circumference of a straw? Would you rather be boiled alive in a wool frock coat or risk being stabbed by your own hatpin? Why was everyone so obsessed with sideburns? Did anyone actually enjoy being dressed like a fancy sofa? How much arsenic is too much when it comes to hat decorations? And did Victorians secretly know that we'd be laughing at their fashion choices centuries later? Congratulations! You've just woken up in 1855 in the heart of Queen Victoria's reign. Your closet is filled with confusion, danger, and at least one suspiciously heavy bonnet. Good luck. You wake up in your chilly Victorian bedroom, sunlight filtering through heavy drapes, and immediately regret being alive in an era before sweatpants. It's time to get dressed, an event that involves more steps than assembling IKEA furniture, and a real risk of minor suffocation. First, you attempt to stretch, but your limbs creak like the floorboards. The air inside your room is roughly the temperature of a haunted meat locker. Somewhere outside, a coal cart rattles past, and you wonder how many layers you'll need to survive the day. Spoiler, it's always more than you own. You sit up and glance at the array of garments laid out for you. Victorians didn't just throw on an outfit and call it a day, no. Getting dressed is a full-contact sport. Forget choosing between jeans and joggers. Instead, your choices involve debates over petticoats, stays, drawers, cravats, and an item called a modesty panel, which sounds like something you'd use to hide from your problems. For women, there are more layers than in a geological survey. For men, it's less about quantity, more about stiffness, both in the clothing and in the attitude. You start with your underclothes, a linen shift or chemise for women, a shirt and drawers for men. These aren't designed for comfort, they're designed for absorbing sweat, maintaining modesty, and making sure that, no matter what else happens, you're always at least partially itchy. If you're feeling fancy, you might even have long woolen stockings. Nothing says fashion like spending 45 minutes wrestling with your own shins. Now comes the corset, and if you thought this was going to get easier, congratulations on your optimism. The corset must be laced tightly, tight enough to alter the weather inside your ribcage. You stand tall while someone, often your mother, maid, or that one cousin who missed their calling as a sailor, yanks on the laces until your spine reconsiders its life choices. Your breathing is now shallow, your waist is respectable, and any plans for eating breakfast have been permanently postponed. Next, petticoats. Several. Each is heavier than the last, scratchier than you thought possible, and all together make you feel like you're being gently smothered by a flock of aggressive geese. If you're a man, your struggle is different. Your collar is starched to a level considered a crime in some countries, and your cravat, basically a fancy neckband, has to be tied just so. Men's trousers are pulled up to alarming heights. Somewhere, a tailor is laughing. The main event, your actual clothes. For women, that means wriggling into a dress, with the help of gravity, friction, and a prayer, and buttoning about 300 tiny buttons up the back. If you're lucky, you can still bend at the waist. Men get waistcoats, jackets, maybe a frock coat. Every piece is tailored to ensure that slouching is impossible and sitting is, well, something you might not risk until lunch. Accessories are non-negotiable. A hat, gloves, perhaps a shawl or cape. You haven't even left your bedroom, but you're already winded and contemplating faking a Victorian fainting spell. Shoes are next. And if they fit comfortably, it's only because they haven't finished shrinking yet. The finishing touch, jewelry for the ladies, a pocket watch for the men, and, if you're truly devoted, a dash of perfume to mask the fact that you've been sweating since you started buttoning your cuffs. All this, and you haven't even reached breakfast. By the time you stagger to the dining room, you've burned more calories dressing than you'll eat all day. But don't worry. Your ensemble is perfectly respectable. And that's all that matters in Victorian England. Looking like you're ready for a royal portrait, even if you secretly wish you were back in bed, wrapped in a nice, simple blanket. Because, in the Victorian era, style was an Olympic sport. And every morning, you're competing for the gold medal in most likely to collapse while wearing 5 layers of wool. The first hurdle of the day is the corset. You stand tall as someone, your mother, a maid, or a very motivated friend, yanks on the laces like they're starting a stubborn lawnmower. Breathing becomes a luxury, but at least your waist is now socially acceptable. Let's talk about the corset. A device designed to transform the human body from functional mammal to hourglass with anxiety. You probably thought the worst part of your day would be getting out of bed. No, this is where the real test begins. The moment the corset comes out of the drawer, you can practically hear your ribs whimper. The ritual starts with you slipping into the corset, which, by Victorian standards, is the most intimate you will ever get with a piece of clothing. It's made of sturdy fabric, reinforced with whalebone or steel, materials normally reserved for shipbuilding or possibly medieval fortifications. You hold on to the bedpost for dear life. Behind you, your lacing assistant is mentally preparing for the world's slowest, least rewarding arm workout. First, the laces are tightened a little, just to get the feel. Then, with all the subtlety of a tug-of-war, the real cinching begins. It's not so much dressing as reorganizing your internal organs for aesthetic purposes. Every tug brings you closer to the mythical Victorian waistline, usually around 18 to 20 inches, roughly the circumference of a large grapefruit or a reasonably sized melon. You're not convinced your spine is meant to do this, but society disagrees. Let's pause to appreciate the creativity. The corset isn't just about squeezing you until you squeak. It's also about posture. Slouching? Not in this century. Your back is ramrod straight, your shoulders are back, and your lungs are now strictly for decoration. If you manage to draw a full breath, it's either a miracle or a wardrobe malfunction. Of course, there are other side effects. Ever wonder why so many Victorian ladies are depicted lounging, swooning, or dramatically fainting onto velvet sofas? It's not an aesthetic choice, it's self-defense. When your blood can't travel north of your elbows, and you haven't inhaled since breakfast, passing out is just your body's way of rebooting. Meanwhile, digestion becomes an Olympic sport. Meals must be nibbled daintily, because the only thing standing between you and public humiliation is the tensile strength of half a whale. Eating too much could mean disaster. Imagine sneaking a second scone at tea, only to realize you're about to become the world's first human balloon animal. You master the art of the shallow breath, the delicate bite, and the polite cough that signals, "I need my corset loosened, or I may see the afterlife." The corset, of course, is not just physical, it's psychological. You are constantly aware of your silhouette. You move differently, you sit differently, you even sneeze differently. Pro tip: never sneeze in a corset. There's a reason Victorian etiquette guides have a chapter on dainty sneezing. The garment promises elegance, but also comes with a side order of existential dread. Victorian fashion magazines helpfully remind you that tight lacing is all the rage, because nothing says, modern woman, like compressing your pancreas for compliments. Doctors occasionally warn about the dangers: deformed ribs, crushed organs, fainting spells, and the sort of indigestion that can only be described as historical. But these are considered small prices to pay for a fashionable figure. At last, you're laced in. You glance in the mirror. Your waist is smaller, your chest is higher, and your dreams of running a marathon have vanished forever. You have achieved the Victorian ideal, and all it cost you was structural integrity. And so you soldier on, upright, breathless, and wondering if your next great idea will be cut short by a rogue hiccup. At least you look fabulous. Because, in the Victorian world, it's better to be admired and nearly unconscious than to risk a slightly natural waistline in polite society. Next up, the crinoline. Imagine wearing a birdcage the size of a small planet under your skirt. Walking requires spatial awareness. Sitting down is a mathematical equation. Doorways are suddenly your greatest enemy. You stand in your room, staring at what can only be described as a wire and canvas tribute to architectural overkill. The crinoline is not a skirt. It's not even really clothing. It's an early Victorian attempt at personal space, except you have less control over it than a rogue shopping cart on a windy day. The process starts by stepping delicately into this expanding circle of doom. Each crinoline is a series of hoops, sometimes steel, sometimes whalebone, sometimes whatever was on sale at the haberdashery, that create the illusion that you are either about to launch into orbit or smuggle several geese out of the country. The larger your social aspirations, the wider your crinoline. Fashionable society in the 1850s and 1860s demanded skirts that spanned entire tea tables. The wider your skirt, the more people assumed you had money, status, and perhaps a structural engineering degree. Once the crinoline is on, the world changes. For one thing, walking is now a group activity. You can't see your own feet. Instead, you learn to shuffle forward, trusting the crinoline to gently bulldoze any obstacles, small pets, or younger siblings in its path. If you ever wondered how to sweep the floor without a broom, don't worry. The bottom hoop of your crinoline does that for you, trailing dust bunnies and the occasional lost shoe as you float majestically past. Doorways, meanwhile, become a test of willpower, geometry, and how much you value your dignity. Victorian homes, with their charmingly narrow entries, were not designed for women who could double as parade floats. You develop a sideways shimmy, the crinoline crab, sliding through doors at an angle with all the grace of an overloaded delivery cart. Heaven help you if someone else is trying to come through at the same time. Etiquette books advise waiting patiently. But the truth is, it's every crinoline for itself. Stairs are their own brand of nightmare. Going up, the crinoline tilts alarmingly. Going down, it wants to race you to the bottom. There is always the risk of snagging on a banister, or in extreme cases, gently bowling over a passing relative. Sit down too quickly, and the crinoline launches the back of your skirt upward, creating an effect reminiscent of a startled peacock. Sitting at all is a negotiation. First, you must locate the chair, then angle yourself just right, then slowly descend while clutching your skirts, praying nothing flips, folds, or tangles. At dinner parties, you may find yourself perched awkwardly at the edge of a chair, hovering several inches above comfort, unable to move your arms, legs, or spirit. And let's not forget the danger to everyone else. Servants were often victims of crinoline-related collisions, sometimes trapped between skirts during the rush to leave a room. Small children and animals lived in perpetual terror of being scooped up and relocated. The crinoline was not just clothing, it was a force of nature. Fashion, of course, is always a competition. There was an unspoken race to see who could achieve the widest circumference. Newspapers of the time made jokes about women taking up entire pews at church or blocking the aisles at the opera. If you're picturing a society where everyone shuffles sideways, you're not far off. So why did they do it? Well, it was all about silhouette and status. A huge skirt meant wealth, femininity, and freedom from manual labor, because you definitely can't dig a potato field dressed like a Victorian solar array. You look at yourself in the mirror, a true satellite dish of fashion. Sure, you may never pass through a doorway with dignity again, but you have arrived. You are wide, you are proud, and you are the Victorian ideal. Now, if you can just make it to breakfast without taking out the hall table, you'll call it a win. Over the cage goes layer after layer of petticoats, each one heavier and itchier than the last. The goal? To achieve maximum fluff, while also providing a workout intense enough to justify skipping leg day. You'd think, after surviving the corset and the crinoline, that the worst is over. But no, Victorian fashion is just getting started. Welcome to the world of petticoats. The original wearable insulation, the unsung heroes of volume, and the single greatest cause of static electricity for an entire century. The first petticoat is almost reasonable, cotton, a little stiff but tolerable. It acts as a sort of slip between you and your crinoline, smoothing out any wire-induced sharp angles and giving you the illusion of comfort. But the magic word is layering, because one petticoat is never enough. Not in this house, not in this era. Not if you want to be seen as someone with proper Victorian standards, which is to say, standards that require you to look like a frosted wedding cake about to topple over in a light breeze. So, on goes the next petticoat. Maybe it's trimmed with lace, maybe it's wool for those extra frigid English mornings, or maybe it's starched to the point of standing upright on its own, like a mildly threatening ghost. Each one adds another layer of heat and friction. Each one itches in places you didn't know existed. As you shimmy into the third or fourth petticoat, you begin to lose touch with your lower extremities. This is less dressing and more committing to a lifelong relationship with laundry. Let's pause and appreciate the physics. The entire purpose of these layers is to make your skirt fluffy. The Victorian ideal wasn't just about width, it was about a softness and movement that suggested you'd never in your life needed to bend over, break a sweat, or touch actual dirt. A skirt with too few petticoats looked limp. A social disaster only slightly less humiliating than being caught in public with bare ankles. The more layers, the more your skirt floats, swishes, and, if you're unlucky, catches a breeze and reveals all the embarrassing undergarment secrets you've been hiding. It's basically a fabric-based airbag system, but one designed to impress the neighbours. With every added petticoat, your range of movement decreases. Stairs become challenging. Sitting requires a slow, calculated descent. And if you ever drop something, just give up. It's lost forever in the tangled jungle of muslin, linen, and lace. Your legs, meanwhile, are somewhere in there, moving as if through a dense forest of fabric, contributing more to friction than forward momentum. There are added benefits, depending on your perspective. The layers provide modesty, so much so that your knees are effectively in witness protection. On the upside, if you fall, you're essentially encased in your own personal bounce house. Victorian fainting couches, not always necessary. You could faint in the street and land softly, assuming you don't roll away downhill. And then there's the sound. Each step creates a gentle, persistent rustling. The more starched the petticoat, the louder the swish. Entering a quiet room, you make your presence known well before you're visible, like a staticky, walking warning bell. Heaven help you if you try to sneak anywhere. Victorian society probably didn't need detectives, because no one could ever actually move silently. It's not all misery, though. Petticoats are a secret source of warmth in cold, drafty houses, and if your house catches fire, always a possibility with so many candles and so much fabric, you've got a solid head start on insulation. Not so much on mobility. By the time you've finished layering, you are a living parfait. Cage, petticoats, dress, and whatever's left of your self-esteem. You haven't even made it to breakfast. But you're already exhausted, a little itchy, and convinced that fashion is just an elaborate endurance test. Congratulations! You are now officially fluffy enough for Victorian society. Just don't sneeze. You might set off an avalanche. The bodice is stiff, the bustle is ridiculous, and together they create a silhouette that can only be described as hourglass meets shelf. Congratulations! Your backside now enters the room 5 seconds before you do. You might think, after surviving the corset, the crinoline, and enough petticoats to cushion a minor fall from a second-story window, that Victorian fashion would finally let up. But no. Welcome to the part of the process where logic takes a back seat, and your wardrobe declares war on the laws of physics. Let's start with the bodice, a garment that's less shirt and more soft armor. Made from tightly woven fabric, boned with strips of whalebone, steel, or even wood if your dressmaker was feeling extra medieval, the bodice's job is to hold everything in place. By everything, we mean your torso, your bust, your posture, your hopes, your dreams, and possibly the family silver if you're headed to a dodgy part of town. The bodice doesn't stretch. It doesn't forgive. It just is. You step into it and instantly feel yourself molded into a shape that says, I haven't drawn a real breath since Tuesday, but at least my buttons are straight. Buttoning the bodice is its own quest, sometimes up the front, sometimes the back, sometimes both, because why should you have dignity or independence? If you're very wealthy or very unlucky, you'll need a maid to do the dozens of tiny buttons or hooks and eyes, each requiring the dexterity of a safecracker and the patience of a saint. Victorian etiquette books are filled with tips for maintaining composure while someone stabs you in the back with button hooks. Smiling through the process is considered polite, but also suspicious, as it probably means you've stopped feeling your arms. And then, the bustle. If you've ever dreamed of strapping a decorative couch cushion to your lower back and then going about your day as if this is totally normal, congratulations, you're halfway to Victorian respectability. The bustle, introduced in the late 1800s, was a padded or wired framework that sat under the skirt at the back, lifting it up and out in a way that could only be described as aggressively optimistic. The point was to create the ultimate contrast, a tiny corseted waist and a backside with ambitions of its own. What's it like to wear one? Imagine trying to walk with a carry-on suitcase hidden under your dress, then add the constant threat of catching it on furniture, small children, or passing horses. Sitting down becomes a group project. Victorian etiquette recommends perching delicately on the very edge of a chair, never leaning back, and, above all, never, ever letting your bustle flatten. A crushed bustle was social ruin, on par with sneezing during grace or being seen in the wrong shade of morning black. The visual effect, of course, was legendary. You might feel like you're wearing a wearable shelf, but from a distance you look like a living hourglass balanced on a cloud. And if anyone asks why, you simply say it's the fashion, while secretly plotting revenge on Charles Frederick Worth, the Parisian designer who popularized the trend and almost certainly never had to wear one himself. Let's not forget the padding. Extra ruffles, bows, and sometimes entire miniature pillows were sewn onto the skirt to give the bustle its unmistakable volume. It's rumoured that some women even hid small belongings in there, handkerchiefs, snacks, or love letters for the truly daring. The bustle was, in every sense, a storage solution with panache. By the time you're dressed, your silhouette is a testament to human stubbornness. Your waist defies math, your back half rivals a garden bench, and your bodice is holding everything together with the kind of determination usually reserved for emergency dental work. But here's the twist. For all its impracticality, there's something kind of triumphant about the whole look. You've wrestled yourself into a bodice, padded out your dignity, and can now sweep into any room with all the confidence of a person who is, frankly, carrying half the upholstery department on their hips. Welcome to peak Victorian fashion. More padding, less logic, and a silhouette that could stop traffic, assuming you can fit through the door. Victorian men aren't off the hook. There's shaving, pomade, starched collars sharp enough to double as weapons, and trousers so high-waisted you'll wonder if your ribs are supposed to go inside. Let's set the scene. You, a Victorian gentleman, have just been startled awake by the distant clatter of a coal cart or the more immediate threat of missing breakfast. There's no time to dawdle. Not when society expects you to look like a freshly pressed accountant by 8 o'clock sharp. Before you can even consider trousers, you're confronted by a mirror, a razor, and the unblinking gaze of your own father's disapproval. He's been dead for years, but you can still feel it. First, the shave. Victorian beards might be glorious, but that doesn't mean you get to skip maintenance. If you're clean-shaven, you're in for a meditative session with cold water, bad soap, and a straight razor that could double as a murder weapon. Nick yourself once, and you've got a red badge of shame for the whole day. If you're more in the worship at the altar of mutton chops camp, expect at least 15 minutes shaping, trimming, and generally coaxing your facial hair into something that suggests both gravitas and the ability to chop wood with your jawline. Now comes the pomade, an industrial-strength blend of animal fats, waxes, and the collective dreams of the Victorian working class. You scoop, smear, and smooth your hair into submission, aiming for a look that says, financially solvent but possibly dangerous. Your hair is now shinier than most people's boots. By the end of this ritual, you've used enough product to lubricate a steam engine. Time for the main event, the starched collar. Victorian collars are not merely stiff, they are architectural. Some stand so tall and sharp they could plausibly be used in self-defense. You wrangle your collar into place, fingers aching, starch dust in the air, and a lingering sense that the entire ensemble is plotting against your carotid arteries. Should you somehow survive this, it's time for the cravat or necktie, which must be tied with the solemn precision of a ceremonial knot. Too loose, and you look like a poet, a fate worse than death. Too tight, and you risk decapitation before lunch. The shirt itself is a marvel of over-engineering, heavy cotton, stiff cuffs, and more buttons than a piano. Getting dressed is less about comfort and more about achieving a crispness that can be seen from across the street. Waistcoats come next. Yes, plural, if you're particularly stylish or expecting to run into your mother-in-law. Each is tailored to fit like a second, slightly more judgmental skin. Now the trousers. Not the sort you can just pull on and go. These are high-waisted marvels, belted, buttoned, or sometimes even braced up to your armpits. There is a very real risk your sternum is now tucked in with your shirt tails. Sit down too quickly, and you might invent a new dance move, or possibly a hernia. Shoes are polished until you can see your future reflected in them. Spoiler, it's just more starch. Your coat or frock, depending on how formal your breakfast is going to be, must be fitted so perfectly that you can neither gain nor lose weight without a tailor or, ideally, a time machine. Accessories? Of course. Gloves for public display, a pocket watch for checking the time and impressing people who can't afford one, and, if you're feeling rakish, a walking stick that's more for flair than actual support. The final flourish is a hat. Not just any hat, but a top hat or a bowler, perfectly perched, the very symbol of I take myself far too seriously. By the time you emerge for breakfast, you're a monument to starch and self-control, a figure so impeccably dressed you could pass for a statue. You can't move freely, you can't breathe deeply, but at least you look like you're ready to negotiate a trade deal, write a sonnet, and duel a rival, all before your second cup of tea. This, after all, is the Victorian way. Stiff collar, stiffer resolve, and a morning routine that leaves no room for wrinkles or weakness. Hats are not just accessories, they're statements, status symbols, and occasionally bird habitats. Whether you're sporting a top hat or a bonnet, your head is now 3 times its usual size. Let's be clear. In Victorian society, hats aren't optional. They're mandatory, like taxes or passive-aggressive notes from your neighbour about your hedge. A Victorian walking down the street without a hat is like a modern person leaving the house without their phone, socially naked, vulnerable, and instantly judged by strangers. The only thing worse than no hat is the wrong hat. This is a society with entire etiquette books dedicated to headgear. You might not know which fork to use at dinner, but heaven help you if you mistake a morning bonnet for an afternoon cap. For men, the top hat is the ultimate power move. Tall, gleaming, and nearly aerodynamic, The top hat says, "I am here to conduct business, command respect, and possibly store lunch for later." It's made from silk, beaver fur, or whatever endangered species was fashionable that decade. The taller the hat, the more important the man. Rumour has it, some men went so far as to add extra padding inside just to get an extra inch. Victorian society was nothing if not competitive about verticality. The process of donning a top hat is almost ceremonial. You have to get the tilt just right, not too jaunty, not too severe. A hat tipped too far forward, says mysterious rogue, while too far back, says gullible tourist. And let's not forget the hat brush, which you will need for constant touch-ups. Because the only thing worse than a dusty hat is being caught brushing it in public, which is considered only slightly less scandalous than public burping. Women's hats are a world unto themselves. The Victorian bonnet could be described as part hat, part personal force field. Bonnet construction is a competitive craft, involving silk, velvet, lace, ribbons, and the entire spring migration of birds. Feathers are good, entire birds are better. It wasn't unheard of for women to perch stuffed canaries, hummingbirds, or even the occasional taxidermied mouse on their heads, all in the name of fashion. The result is less hat and more portable garden party. Then comes the challenge of actually wearing it. You don't just plop a bonnet on your head and call it a day. No, you must secure it with hat pins, long, slightly terrifying steel skewers designed to keep your hat in place and, as an added bonus, serve as Victorian self-defense tools. Some women carried so many hat pins that it's a miracle their heads didn't resemble early radio antennae. Hatpins were so effective that lawmakers eventually debated whether they should be regulated as concealed weapons. Imagine explaining to the police that you're not armed, just fashionable. The real fun begins when you try to enter a carriage, sit in a pew, or, heaven forbid, dance. The larger the hat, the smaller your personal space, and the greater the risk of taking out a bystander with a swift head turn. If two women wearing bonnets pass each other in a narrow hallway, etiquette dictates that they stop, apologize, and then engage in a delicate waltz of tilting and twisting until one finally makes it through, slightly rumpled but victorious. Hats also serve as silent communication. A lowered brim means, "I'm not interested," while a quick tip signals respect, flirtation, or, in extreme cases, that you're about to propose marriage on the spot. The wrong hat, however, sends all the wrong signals. Wear a widow's veil to a summer picnic, and people will avoid you like you're carrying the Black Death. By the end of the day, your scalp aches, your neck is sore, and you have a new appreciation for modern ball caps. But in Victorian society, this is the price you pay to be taken seriously, or at least to avoid being shunned by your grandmother. So you tip your hat to the world, adjust the bird, and stride forward, head held high, 3 times its usual size, and proud of it. You slip on a pair of gloves because, in Victorian society, bare hands are practically scandalous. Never mind that you can no longer pick up anything smaller than a soup spoon. Gloves are not just an accessory. They're a declaration of civility, status, and your willingness to struggle through the day with roughly the same manual dexterity as a decorative mannequin. The rules are strict. Gloves for calling, gloves for church, gloves for carriage rides, gloves for tea, and of course, different gloves for dinner. You'd think you were prepping for a synchronized swimming routine, not simply going out to check the post. It all begins after you've wrangled yourself into your bodice, fluffed your petticoats, and fought your way through the hat minefield. At this point, your fingers are one of the few body parts left free, until now. A proper Victorian slips her, or his hands, into tight-fitting gloves made of kid leather, silk, or sometimes cotton if you're merely genteel adjacent, buttoned at the wrist. These gloves are so snug that you often require a button hook, a device that's 1 part sewing tool, 1 part marital test. There's a trick to it, and if you're new, expect to lose a few fingernails, or your patience, before you succeed. Once inside, your fingers are rendered almost entirely ornamental. Need to tie a ribbon? Forget it. Want to peel an orange? You'll be eating that with a fork and a sense of longing. If you need to blow your nose, you'll have to carefully remove your glove first, dab delicately, then wrangle the glove back on without making a scene. Dropping a glove is a minor crisis. Victorian etiquette dictates a series of complicated apologies, retrievals, and, if witnessed by the wrong person, possibly an invitation to marry. The social codes are relentless. For women, the length and colour of your gloves matter. Pale kid gloves for daytime, darker shades for evening, and elbow length for formal events. Men, meanwhile, are expected to remove gloves when shaking hands, unless, of course, they're meeting a lady in the street. Then it's gloves on, hat off, and confusion everywhere. If you're caught with bare hands, people might assume you've just committed a crime. Or worse, manual labour. Gloves are also a silent language. Dropping one by accident was a classic move in Victorian flirting. If a gentleman picked it up and returned it, you were officially in a slow-motion courtship that involved more gloves, more sighing, and an absolute absence of meaningful conversation. Gloves are for hand-holding, but only when the chaperone is looking the other way. Some etiquette guides went so far as to recommend wearing gloves while playing cards, to avoid the horror of someone glimpsing your scandalous, unadorned knuckles. Of course, wearing gloves all day, every day, comes with side effects. Hands become soft but slightly clammy, with the faint odour of whatever glove powder was trendy this year. You might develop a glove tan, a line around your wrist that marks you as a person of status, and, simultaneously, a victim of fashion's least useful trend. And since gloves are rarely washed, leather shrinks and silk tears, they collect a lifetime's worth of mysteries. Crumbs from afternoon tea, ink stains, the lingering aroma of last night's roast beef. Each pair tells a story, most of them slightly unhygienic. If you're lucky enough to get through the day without losing a glove, you'll still spend the evening unbuttoning, stretching, and airing them out, preferably on a little wooden hand-shaped stand, because apparently even gloves need their own furniture. The entire process, from button hook to glove box, is a microcosm of Victorian life, complicated, uncomfortable, and always just a little absurd. So you flex your fingers and gaze wistfully at anything smaller than a soup spoon, knowing you'll never hold it again. But that's the price of propriety. Your hands, eternally gloved, perfectly clean, and forever just out of reach of the simple joys of picking your nose. Welcome to Victorian fashion, the era when even your thumbs had social anxiety. Victorian footwear is a triumph of appearance over comfort. Whether it's narrow boots or pointed heels, each step is a calculated risk. Bunions are basically a rite of passage. It's morning, and you've managed to stuff yourself into more layers of fabric than a well-insulated scarecrow. Now, you face your final challenge: shoes. The shoes stare back at you from under the bed, gleaming with the menace of objects that know they have the upper hand. For Victorian women, this usually means a pair of ankle boots so slender that only a time traveller with origami toes could hope to fit inside. For men, it's a choice between highly polished leather dress shoes and boots that double as portable sweat lodges. First, you wrestle with your stockings, wool for winter, silk if you're wealthy or trying to show off. Then it's time to stuff your feet into shoes that seem suspiciously smaller than they were yesterday. Victorian sizing was more suggestion than science, and breaking in a new pair meant months of polite hobbling and very impolite thoughts. Laces are tightly tied, buttons are painstakingly fastened with tiny hooks, and by the end of it, your toes are on first-name terms with one another. Men's shoes don't fare much better. Polished to a mirror sheen, they're less about supporting the foot and more about projecting a sense of financial stability. Heels were not just for women. Men's boots often had small, stacked heels, useful for posture, for not getting stuck in the mud, and for tripping dramatically on cobblestones in front of potential suitors. The standard Victorian shoe is unsympathetic. No arch support, no cushioning, and only the faintest recognition that feet come in more than one shape. Appearance is everything. Shoes are meticulously cleaned and shined, even though within 5 minutes of leaving the house they'll be coated in mud, horse manure, or the mysterious ooze that lines every Victorian street. Ladies carry little brushes in their reticules for emergency polishings, while men glare at puddles with the stoicism of someone facing a minor Greek tragedy. Walking is a gamble. One wrong step and you're either ankle, deep in sludge, or flat on your back. Legs in the air, dignity nowhere to be seen. The dangers multiply indoors. Wooden floors and polished tiles turn your footwear into makeshift ice skates. Dancing at a ball becomes a game of how many toes will I have left by midnight? Women's pointed heels get stuck in floorboards. Men's boots squeak just loudly enough to announce their presence in every silent corridor. Stairs are an exercise in caution. If you manage to avoid tripping over your own feet, you'll probably trip over someone else's. No one makes it to bed without at least one stubbed toe. For children, the struggle is the same, only smaller and more expensive. Shoes for the young are often hand-me-downs, already warped into the shape of a sibling's foot. For the poor, shoes might be an occasional luxury, worn only for Sunday best, weddings and funerals. Bare feet were common among the lower classes, much to the horror of etiquette books and upper-class sensibilities. By the end of the day, everyone's feet are tired, sore, and possibly a little deformed. Bunions, corns, and blisters were the unspoken price of fashion, trophies earned with every tight-laced boot and dainty heel. Foot powder, foot baths, and the strategic application of bandages are your only solace. Taking off your shoes at night feels less like undressing and more like a religious experience. Yet, for all their discomfort, Victorian shoes completed the ensemble. A well-dressed person was well shod, even if it meant risking permanent foot trauma. So you limp through life with your chin held high, shoes polished, laces tight, and the quiet hope that the next century will finally invent sneakers. Until then, each step is a minor victory, and each bunion a badge of honor in the ongoing war between appearance and comfort. Styling your hair takes longer than writing a novel. Whether you're assembling ringlets, braids, or an updo that defies gravity, the final result is held together by a frightening number of sharp objects. The first rule of Victorian hairstyling: abandon all hope of leaving the house quickly. You start with clean, or more likely, well-brushed hair. Baths are rare, so hair is fluffed with a boar bristle brush and a hopeful prayer that no one will notice last night's candle wax still stuck to your fringe. For women, the morning hair ritual begins with separating, curling, braiding, and teasing your locks until your arms ache and your reflection starts to look like someone else's problem. The go-to style of the era is the updo, an elaborate construction of loops, braids, and ringlets that towers over your scalp, like a particularly ambitious soufflé. If your hair is thin or stubbornly refuses to poof, don't worry, Victorians have the solution. Hair pieces. You simply purchase a handful of switches, real or, if you're unlucky, suspiciously shiny, to pad out your style. These are then blended, pinned, and discreetly lacquered in place, until even your closest friend can't tell where your hair ends, and the milliner's creativity begins. Speaking of pins, you'll need a small arsenal. Hairpins, bobby pins, and invisible side combs are marshalled into battle each morning. It's not uncommon to have 24 pins in your hair at once, each waiting to jab you awake the moment you forget and lean back. Losing a pin means you're going to find it later the hard way, by sitting on it, or, if you're lucky, only jabbing your scalp. The sharpest among them are saved for self-defense. Victorian style. Nothing says back off like a well-placed hatpin. For men, the hair routine is less about construction and more about order. You must comb and slick your hair with enough pomade to lubricate the gears of a small factory. Styles range from severe side part to elaborate waves, each promising the air of distinguished intellect and the faint scent of beef tallow. If you're sporting sideburns, mutton chops, or a mustache, those get their own special attention, brushed, oiled, and trimmed with the seriousness of a royal proclamation. Let's not forget the finishing touches. For ladies, a sprinkle of rice powder or even violet-scented dust adds that "I woke up like this" aura. Never mind that you've been awake since dawn. wrangling your hair into submission. Flowers, ribbons, and even jeweled combs are woven into the style for special occasions, which means you get to spend half the party checking if your left earring has migrated north. Hair jewelry isn't just for the rich. Brooches and barrettes become tiny billboards advertising your taste, marital status, and available income. And then there's the weather. Rain is your mortal enemy. Humidity threatens to collapse your updo into a damp, shapeless memory. Wind is a disaster. One strong gust, and your hairstyle could unravel, unleashing a shower of pins, curls, and pride onto the nearest passerby. Etiquette guides suggest maintaining composure at all times, but they don't offer advice for what to do when your entire hairpiece is snatched by a rogue breeze and lands in the punch bowl. For children and the lower classes, hair is kept simpler but rarely easy. Schoolgirls are wrestled into tight braids or pigtails, often so tight they look permanently surprised. Servants are expected to keep their hair smooth and neatly pinned beneath caps, which means they live in constant fear of a stray curl rebelling against society. By the end of the day, undoing your hair takes almost as long as styling it. Removing pins, untangling braids, and brushing out knots is a full contact sport. But, at last, you can rest your scalp, at least until tomorrow's battle. So remember, in Victorian England, hair is never just hair. It's an engineering project, a symbol of respectability, and a daily reminder that sometimes the most dangerous weapon in your arsenal is a perfectly ordinary hairpin. Forget natural beauty. Victorian cosmetics are basically chemical warfare. Pale skin is in, so go ahead and dust your face with some lead-based powder and a little arsenic for that healthy, just barely alive glow. If you thought modern skincare routines were complicated, the Victorian era will make you rethink every complaint you've ever had about a breakout. The beauty ideal is a face so pale and smooth it could double as an undercooked biscuit. A natural tan means you actually go outside and, horrors, work. No, thank you. Victorian fashion says the only healthy glow you should have is the result of heavy metals and wishful thinking. Your morning ritual starts with cold water splashed over your face. Not because it's refreshing, but because anything else, like soap, might be too harsh. The Victorian beauty market is booming with skin tonics, which are really just bottles of hope, laced with ingredients you'd find in a murder mystery. Want to lighten those freckles? Try a little ammonia or some mercuric chloride. Looking for a youthful blush? There's always carmine, crushed beetles, or, if you're really fancy, a dab of red ochre. Never mind that your cheeks are now both radiant and mildly poisonous. But the real star of the show is lead powder. Light, silky, and toxic, it's the foundation of every well-bred lady's look. You pat it over your face and neck, carefully blending it so no one suspects you've been exposed to sunlight in the past decade. The result? An ethereal, ghostly pallor that says, I spend all my time indoors, probably writing tragic poetry and not catching cholera from the drinking water. If you want extra shimmer, just add a little pearl powder, another Victorian favourite, assuming you don't mind inhaling the occasional oyster. For the daring, there's arsenic. Yes, the same ingredient found in murder plots and rat poison. You can buy arsenic wafers from reputable chemists, advertised as a way to improve the complexion. A wafer a day, and you'll achieve that flawless, corpse-adjacent radiance. Of course, you may also achieve vomiting, dizziness, and an early grave, but in the quest for beauty, these are considered acceptable side effects. Eyes get their own questionable treatment. If you want that wide-eyed, innocent look, a drop of belladonna, deadly nightshade, will do the trick. It dilates your pupils, makes you look perpetually surprised, and slowly blurs your vision. The occasional hallucination is just the price you pay for being irresistible. Eyebrows are gently darkened with burnt clove or lampblack, which, aside from sounding like villainous ingredients, are actually a step up from the other options. Let's not skip the lips. In an era suspicious of overt colour, a touch of rouge is artfully smeared on cheeks and lips alike. Too much. and you risk being mistaken for a lady of the evening, or worse, a Frenchwoman. For the truly bold, homemade lip tints from red wine or beet juice provide just enough colour to suggest you're alive, but not enough to imply you enjoy it. Perfume, meanwhile, isn't just for smelling pleasant, it's for survival. Bathing is rare, so a heavy cloud of lavender, rosewater, or, if you're feeling dramatic, violet, is considered both charming and necessary. Some Victorian perfumes even contain musk, ambergris, or civet, substances that can only be described as smells like expensive confusion. All of this is applied with dainty brushes, rabbit-foot puffs, and a sense of urgency, because the real danger is being caught by a suitor mid-beautification. Victorian etiquette decrees that men should never witness a woman painting her face, presumably because the illusion of effortless beauty is more important than the ability to breathe without fainting. By the end of the day, your face is glowing, your head is spinning, and your beauty routine has shaved a few years off your life expectancy. But you look delicate, refined, and, if you don't sweat or smile, perfectly presentable. Welcome to Victorian beauty, where a touch of arsenic is worth 1,000 compliments, and the only real secret is survival. With daily baths mostly a fantasy, everyone relies on heavy perfumes to mask the scent of, well, everything. You're now a walking cloud of lavender, musk, and repressed hygiene. Let's start with the basics. Victorian England does not smell good. Between coal smoke, open sewers, horse manure, and the personal contributions of everyone packed into your average street, your nose is under daily assault. Even the most genteel parlour is just a stiff breeze away from odour stable, odour fishmonger, or odour someone fainted on the omnibus again. Bathing, meanwhile, is a luxury, performed weekly by the wealthy, monthly by the middling, and, on special occasions, by everyone else. When the tub does come out, you'll be sharing the water with every sibling, cousin, and stray barn cat in the household. Soap exists, but it's harsh and expensive, and nothing short of a chemical spill can remove the lingering scent of boiled cabbage and regret. Enter perfume, the great social equalizer, the Victorian answer to deodorant, and possibly the only thing standing between civilization and total olfactory collapse. Perfume is everywhere. Bottles crowd dressing tables, sachets of dried herbs are stuffed into drawers, closets, and sometimes your undergarments, just in case you get undressed in public, which, to be clear, you shouldn't. But you can never be too careful. Even handkerchiefs are liberally doused, to be pressed to the face in moments of public crisis, such as encountering a malodorous acquaintance or fainting in church. The recipes for these scents are a blend of creativity, desperation, and whatever the perfumer can get their hands on. Some are lovely, rosewater, lavender, orange blossom. Others are an exercise in trust. Ambergris, aka whale bath, civet, from the back end of a cat-like animal, and musk, harvested from a gland you definitely don't want to discuss at tea. In true Victorian fashion, these ingredients are then distilled, blended, and poured into ornate glass bottles meant to be displayed as much as used. The more elaborate the bottle, the higher your status. Bonus points if it's shaped like a mythical creature or weighs more than your head. Wearing perfume isn't just a beauty ritual, it's a survival strategy. Society expects it. Not perfuming yourself before a party is like showing up in your nightgown, or worse, forgetting your gloves. The etiquette books are clear. A proper lady or gentleman is never redolent of labour. You dab perfume on wrists, behind ears, inside gloves, and even on your fan, so you can waft sweet-smelling air at yourself while secretly judging everyone else's hygiene. Some fashionistas go the extra mile, sprinkling perfume on petticoats and hats, so that every turn of the head releases a new aromatic offensive. But with so much perfume in the air, things can get competitive. Too much, and you risk suffocating the entire dinner party. Too little, and you're accused of being earthy. Finding the perfect balance is an art. There are horror stories of gentlemen losing consciousness after an enthusiastic encounter with a heavily perfumed bustle, or of carriages rendered uninhabitable for weeks by a spilled bottle of eau de cologne. Perfume is powerful, volatile, and, thanks to the presence of alcohol, animal extracts, and the occasional dash of arsenic, sometimes actually flammable. Perfume is also a secret language. The scent you choose says something about you. Violets for innocence, roses for passion, sandalwood for I'm mysterious and possibly a magician. Young women might stick to lighter florals, while widows are expected to smell appropriately somber, as if sorrow itself has a fragrance. Men's scents lean woodsy, spicy, or sometimes just extra soap for the man who wants to pretend he bathes daily. Of course, no perfume can fully conquer the Victorian world's endless stench, but the effort is everything. You move through life trailing a fog of manufactured beauty, a portable garden in a land of manure. So take a whiff, dab a little extra on your gloves, and be grateful. At least no one can smell the existential dread under your lavender cloud. In Victorian times, that's about as fresh as it gets. There's a dress for every time of day, every activity, every mood. Heaven help you if you wear the wrong shade of mauve before 2 p.m. or if your hat is 2 inches out of fashion. If you thought modern fashion had rules, you haven't met the Victorians. Theirs is a world governed by a dress code so detailed and rigid, it makes a school uniform policy look like casual Friday at a tech startup. There's not just getting dressed, there's getting dressed correctly, an ever-evolving social minefield. Every item you wear is a signal, and every signal is being scrutinized by someone lurking behind a lace curtain with nothing better to do. Start with morning attire. Before noon, ladies are to appear in modest morning dresses, which means subdued colours, high necklines, and sleeves long enough to give you a permanent farmer's tan under all that fabric. Your hair should be simple, your jewellery minimal, and your expression serene. Never mind that you've already spent 2 hours wrangling your petticoats and are contemplating a nap. Men, meanwhile, opt for crisp linen, light colours, and waistcoats that say, I'm responsible, but also possibly bored to tears. As the clock strikes noon, the fashion landscape shifts. Now it's time for the afternoon dress. Yes, there is a dress specifically for the awkward period between lunch and tea. This outfit may involve brighter fabrics, more elaborate trims, and, if you're feeling truly wild, a hint of contrasting colour at the cuff. Jewellery becomes less of a social misdemeanour. It is now acceptable to let a little personality peek through, as long as it's still within the strict confines of taste and, of course, the season. And then, evening. If you're invited anywhere after sunset, you must change again, ideally into a dress with silk, velvet, or a bit of lace, depending on whether you're attending a ball, a dinner party, or a dramatic reading of Byron. Necklines drop, sleeves shorten, and the number of decorative bows triples. For men, black is the order of the evening, with tailcoats, crisp white shirts, and the kind of bow tie that could double as a bird's nest. If your attire is even a smidge out of step, expect a raised eyebrow, a whispered remark, or, worst of all, an awkward pause in conversation followed by your name scribbled onto a mental blacklist. But it's not just about the time of day, it's also about the activity. Visiting a friend in the afternoon? Calling dress. Slightly dressy, never flamboyant. Attending church? Out comes the sober best, with hats that block the view of at least 3 people behind you. Taking a walk? You must wear walking dress, specially constructed to resist mud splatters, turn heads, and contain precisely 0 comfort. Shopping at the market? Don't be ridiculous, there's a specific ensemble for that too. Colours matter as much as cut. Wearing white after the wrong date or black when not in mourning can set off social alarms that echo for weeks. Even patterns are suspect. Tartan is for Highland picnics, polka dots for the truly brave, and anything too bright is considered a desperate cry for attention, or worse, foreign influence. And let's not forget the fashion magazines and etiquette guides, published weekly, sometimes daily, to keep you up to date on the latest musts and absolutely nots. These guides are the 19th century equivalent of doom scrolling, filled with dire warnings about hem lengths, lace trims, and the tragic consequences of last season's boots. And should you ever fall afoul of the dress code, rest assured that the dress police, otherwise known as elderly aunts, competitive neighbours, and the local vicar's wife, will let you know, subtly of course, or sometimes with a 3-hour lecture on the decline of civilization. So you live in fear of fashion faux pas, dressing in layers of self-doubt and itchy fabric. Because in Victorian society, your clothes don't just make the person, they make or break your entire social existence. Just remember, if you survive until bedtime without getting fashion, shamed, you've had a good day. And whatever you do, never wear mauve in the morning. That's just asking for trouble. A simple stroll is an adventure in survival, dodging puddles, hoop skirts, and unwanted attention. Victorian London's streets are a minefield of mud, horse droppings, and occasionally a passing chimney sweep. You step outside, feeling confident in your hat, gloves, and shoes, until you see the street. Victorian cities weren't built with pedestrians in mind. The footpath is a patchwork of uneven stones, each one strategically placed to ensure maximum tripping potential. The first step is a gamble. Will it be solid ground, or will you find yourself ankle deep in something that definitely isn't water? Congratulations, it's a mystery puddle. It might be rain, it might be runoff from the local fishmonger, or it might be the remains of last night's night soil, Victorian code for someone emptied their chamber pot out the window. Walking isn't so much a leisurely activity as it is an obstacle course. Your skirts, if you're a lady, function as a highly inefficient mop, collecting every possible stain on their lower hem. Hoop skirts catch on door frames, lampposts, and the occasional startled dog. Petticoats become heavy with water and debris, making every step a battle against gravity and decency. Men's trousers, meanwhile, are hemmed just low enough to guarantee at least one splash per block, while highly polished shoes steadily lose their shine to the London grime. And then, of course, there are the horses. Horses are everywhere, pulling carriages, delivering goods, and generously distributing droppings along every thoroughfare. Every city street has its own special aroma, part manure, part coal smoke, with top notes of stale beer and roasted chestnuts. No one is safe from the mystery splatter, which can leap up from the street with a single misplaced step, ruining both your dignity and your best pair of gloves. If you're really unlucky, you'll catch a passing hansom cab at just the wrong moment and get a bonus shower of mud for your trouble. Your senses must remain on high alert. It's not enough to watch your step. You must also keep an eye out for other pedestrians, errant dogs, fruit vendors, newsboys hawking scandal sheets, and the ever-present risk of an open coal hole. Chimney sweeps, often small children, inexplicably covered in soot, dart through traffic like sprightly, slightly haunted cats. Step aside too slowly, and you might get knocked into a barrel of pickled herring, or worse, mistaken for someone's long-lost cousin from the countryside. For women, the journey is complicated further by social expectations. A proper lady does not walk alone. She is ideally accompanied by a chaperone, a friend, or at the very least, a disapproving relative. This doesn't stop the local Romeos from making their intentions known. A simple stroll can quickly become a gauntlet of accidental run-ins, earnest introductions, and, if you're particularly unlucky, a marriage proposal from a man whose primary qualification is that he owns a hat with extra feathers. If you're of a certain age or status, you may be followed by street urchins, helpful and opportunistic in equal measure, offering to carry your parcels, fetch a cab, or simply point out which puddles contain fewer surprises. In return, they expect a coin, a smile, or the chance to dart away with your shopping basket if you're not paying attention. All the while, you're trying to maintain your composure. Victorian etiquette dictates that you never, ever show annoyance, no matter how many times your skirts are splashed or your gloves soiled. If you do lose your temper and shout, you risk being branded unladylike, which is just a short hop away from potential harlot in the local gossip circuit. By the time you arrive at your destination, whether it's a friend's house, the market, or just the other side of the block, you're disheveled, exhausted, and quietly questioning every fashion choice you've ever made. But you've survived another walk through Victorian London, mud-stained, manure, splattered, and still technically single. And that's an achievement worth celebrating, preferably indoors, with your feet up and a very large cup of tea. Visiting friends isn't just about popping in. It's an elaborate ceremony involving calling cards, awkward silences, and desperately trying not to sweat through your 5 layers of clothing. Imagine wanting to see a friend or neighbour and simply showing up. In the Victorian era, such recklessness would get you branded a social anarchist. The calling card ritual is a precise ballet of etiquette, with every step designed to keep you at a safe, awkward distance from genuine human spontaneity. You don't just visit. You request the privilege of possibly being allowed to visit, as long as nobody's having a nervous episode or reorganizing the piano. First, you select a calling card. It's not just a piece of cardboard, it's your personal brand. The card is thick, cream-coloured, embossed, and, if you're really showing off, edged in gold leaf. Your name is printed in elegant script, nothing too big or bold, lest you be mistaken for a dentist or someone from the theatre. You tuck your card into your glove, because if you're caught carrying it bare-handed, you might as well sign your own social death warrant. Then you travel to your acquaintance's home, braving the streets with all the perils of mud, horse manure, and well-meaning marriage proposals. By the time you arrive, you're sweating, your hat's crooked, and you're reconsidering your entire approach to friendship. At the door, you're met by a servant, never the host themselves, because that would be far too intimate. You present your card on a little silver tray, as if you are a dainty appetizer being offered up for social approval. Now, you wait. Sometimes you're ushered into the parlour. Sometimes you're told the lady of the house is not at home, which is Victorian code for she's at home but does not want to see you, possibly ever. If you are admitted, you sit, perching on the edge of a settee, careful not to crush your bustle, gloves still on, and clutching your reticule with all the anxious grace of a debutante hiding a ferret in her purse. Conversation is an exercise in careful neutrality. You discuss the weather, the state of the roads, perhaps the health of a mutual acquaintance's pet canary. Anything more controversial, politics, religion, the mystery meat at last Sunday's luncheon, is strictly off-limits. If there are awkward silences, and there will be, you fill them by complimenting the drapes, the potted ferns, or the host's latest needlework. The Victorians take pride in polite society, which, as far as anyone can tell, is mostly just small talk in large hats. If refreshments are offered, you accept with gratitude and terror. Drinking tea in gloves is a fine motor challenge. One slip, and you risk scalding your lap, your dignity, and the entire social future of your family. Tiny cakes are consumed in even tinier bites, each crumb a potential disaster. You try not to sweat through your bodice, because nothing says unsuitable visitor like leaving a moist impression on the furniture. After an appropriate interval, never too long, never too short, you rise, thank your host for their kind hospitality, and make your exit. But the ritual doesn't end there. Now it's your host's turn to respond. If you're in favour, she'll return your call within a week, card in hand. If not, your card may languish on the silver tray, slowly gathering dust and shame, a silent monument to your failed attempt at friendship. The calling card ritual is exhausting, opaque, and only mildly rewarding, yet it is the backbone of Victorian social life, ensuring that no one ever feels too comfortable, too casual, or too close to anyone else. So you keep your gloves on, your smile fixed, and your calling cards at the ready, always prepared for the next round of social gymnastics. In the end, visiting friends is less about connection and more about choreography. But if you can master the art of the card, the tray, and the awkward conversation, you'll survive Victorian society with your reputation and your gloves intact. You're invited to dinner, but eating with a corset and full skirts is an Olympic sport. The goal is to look elegant while not fainting into your soup or accidentally setting yourself on fire with a stray candle. First comes the most terrifying part, dressing for the occasion. Dinner parties are not casual affairs in the Victorian era. This isn't a come-as-you-are event. It's a high-stakes round of fashion roulette, and everyone's watching. You pull on your evening dress, which is likely heavier and shinier than any outfit you've ever worn to anything, ever. Satin, taffeta, lace, velvet, sometimes all at once. Jewelry is selected to reflect both your wealth and your willingness to risk strangulation by choker. You add gloves, elbow length of course, a fan, and a hair ornament that could double as a self-defense tool if negotiations for the last biscuit get out of hand. The bodice squeezes you like an overly affectionate python. Your waist is cinched to the circumference of a decent-sized melon, and you can already feel the telltale signs of rib protest. Bustle and petticoats are artfully arranged to create the impression of both elegance and mild instability. Sitting upright is now a team effort, with your abdominal muscles, spinal column, and personal willpower all working overtime. Now for the actual dinner. You arrive, greeted by a butler who looks as though he hasn't blinked since Waterloo. The dining room is candlelit, glowing with a combination of beeswax, hope, and a fine haze of coal dust from the street. Every surface sparkles, except the one suspiciously sticky patch by your seat, which you try not to notice. You're shown to your place, and the ordeal of sitting begins. This is not as simple as bending your knees and lowering yourself. With corset, skirts, and a bustle, the process is more akin to docking the International Space Station. You must position yourself just so, lower carefully, and hover above the chair until gravity and your own determination do the rest. Then comes the eating. Victorian meals are multi-course marathons. Soup, fish, roast, fowl, pudding, and something called jellied tongue that you pray is a metaphor. Each course comes with its own cutlery, glassware, and rules of engagement. You balance your plate in one hand and your dignity in the other, all while keeping your elbows in, your back straight, and your gloved fingers from launching a fork at your host's face. Breathing deeply is a luxury you can no longer afford. If you drop anything, a fork, a napkin, your composure, don't even think about retrieving it yourself. Instead, you signal the nearest servant, who retrieves it with the discretion of a professional magician and the speed of someone trying not to make eye contact with your bustle. Spills are inevitable. So is at least one near-death experience with a candle when you lean too close and your sleeve flirts with spontaneous combustion. That's why so many Victorian tablecloths are white, so you can see the scorch marks left by previous guests. Conversation at the table is equally fraught. You must be witty but not too bold, clever but not controversial, and always able to discuss the weather at a moment's notice. Laughter is best kept to polite titters, as anything heartier risks undoing the structural integrity of your outfit and startling the potted ferns. As the meal progresses, you begin to plot your escape. You can feel a bead of sweat running down your spine, gathering momentum as it navigates your corset's whalebone channels. You smile, you nod, you try not to faint, and you hope dessert is something you can eat without chewing, just in case you need to play dead to avoid another round of jellied tongue. At last, the ordeal ends. You stand, bracing yourself for the full-body exhale that signals survival. You've made it through a Victorian dinner party, still upright, mostly intact, and only lightly singed. You may never breathe deeply again, but at least you looked good while suffering. In the Victorian era, that's the true measure of social success. At the ball, you glide, or waddle, across the floor, swirling skirts and dodging rivals. Beware of waltzing too vigorously. One wrong move, and you could knock over a small orchestra. It's the social event of the season, and everyone who's anyone is here, dressed in their finest, squeezed into corsets, draped in jewels, and crucially, wearing enough fabric to curtain a minor palace. You arrive at the ballroom, the scent of perfume thick in the air, and the sound of a string quartet barely audible above the swish of silk, and the nervous chatter about who's been seen with whom. The lighting is soft and romantic, which is code for dim enough to hide the sweat stains, and a thick rug runs down the centre of the grand room, mostly to muffle the clatter of shoes that have never been properly broken in. Before you even set foot on the dance floor, there's the grand entrance, a parade of bustles, bonnets, and bejeweled accessories, each one vying for space and attention. Ladies size each other up with the practiced eye of a seasoned general, measuring not just fashion sense, but how much of the buffet they could potentially block at once. Your own crinoline has a mind of its own, refusing to pass through doorways, occasionally attempting to reverse course, and generally acting as your slightly resentful sidekick. When the music swells and partners are chosen, the real chaos begins. Dancing in Victorian times isn't just about skill or grace, it's about spatial management. Your hoop skirt is less accessory and more portable obstacle course. Every spin or swoop requires mathematical precision and a sixth sense for the location of nearby knees, chairs, and priceless vases. If your partner misjudges the distance, the consequences are immediate. Toes are stepped on, shins are bruised, and at least one aunt will have her sherry knocked out of her hand. A waltz, theoretically the most romantic of dances, quickly devolves into a battle of wills between you, your skirts, and the laws of physics. One vigorous twirl, and you become an accidental centrifugal force generator, flinging nearby dancers and the occasional canapé across the parquet floor. If you're particularly unlucky, your skirts will sweep a candelabra or small child into the melee, leading to a scene that's equal parts slapstick and social disaster. Etiquette guides recommend moving with light, airy steps, but they don't mention the very real risk of tipping over backwards if your partner dips you with too much enthusiasm. Men's fashions don't make things easier. Tailcoats restrict arm movement, starched collars dig into necks, and polished shoes ensure that traction is a fond memory. One wrong step, and you're sliding into the refreshment table, arms flailing, monocle lost somewhere in the trifle. But everyone's too polite to mention it, unless, of course, you take out the host's prized potted fern, in which case you'll be whispered about until the next ice age. The real tension, however, isn't just on the floor. It's in the glances exchanged between mothers plotting their daughters' social futures, bachelors dodging matchmaking attempts, and wallflowers hoping to avoid being recruited into a quadrille they don't remember how to dance. Rivalries simmer just below the surface. A subtle elbow here, a misplaced skirt there, and suddenly someone's chances of making a good impression are ruined for the night. Dancing is less about joy and more about strategic survival. Eventually, the orchestra packs up, exhausted and possibly slightly concussed. You retreat to the edges of the room, breathless, hair askew, and skirts tangled. Your feet throb, your corset creaks, and your face is frozen in a rictus of polite delight. But you survived. You face down the perils of the ballroom, collisions, crinolines, and the ever-present threat of being spun directly into a decorative urn. In Victorian society, that's a triumph. You made it through the ballroom blitz, dignity mostly intact, and left the small orchestra standing. For tonight, at least, you are victorious. For Victorian men, evening means swapping one starched uniform for another, tailcoats, waistcoats, monocles, and more pomade than sense. Sweating is not permitted. Evening descends, and with it arrives the most daunting ritual in a Victorian man's day, getting dressed for dinner or a night out. The standards are unyielding, and the pressure is high. You've spent all day trying not to crease your linen, and now it's time to double down on discomfort in the pursuit of social perfection. The transformation begins with the tailcoat, an essential garment that is half tuxedo, half highly structured straitjacket. The cut is severe, the shoulders sharp, and the tails, well, let's just say you'll have to master the art of turning around without taking out a candle holder or two. Your waistcoat is next, buttoned tightly over a shirt so stiff with starch it practically crackles when you move. There are rules about buttoning, by the way, never the bottom one, unless you want to look like you've never read a single etiquette manual in your life. Next comes the cravat or bow tie. This is no ordinary piece of neckwear. It's a knotty, origami-like project that must be tied with a level of precision that could land you a job at the Admiralty. Too loose, and you're a scoundrel. Too tight, and you're in danger of cutting off circulation to your brain. Some gentlemen, terrified of public humiliation, hire their valets to tie it for them. Others stand for half an hour in front of the mirror, swearing quietly and rereading the instructions by lamplight, only to settle for good enough and hope no one notices. Now for the accessories. White gloves are a must. Never mind that you might sweat through them within minutes. It is universally agreed that a gentleman does not perspire. He glows with distinction. Into your breast pocket goes a crisp handkerchief, starched, folded, and never actually used for anything so vulgar as blowing your nose. The pocket watch dangles from a gold chain, ticking away both the minutes and your remaining confidence. Don't forget the monocle. It adds an air of intelligence and also conveniently covers the panic in one eye. Shoes are shined to a mirror-like finish, so slippery you may find yourself gliding across marble floors in an impromptu waltz with gravity. Patent leather, if you can afford it, is ideal. If not, a solid hour with a brush and polish will do. A man's footwear is a reflection of his respectability, so you polish as if your social life depends on it, because it absolutely does. Hair must be tamed with pomade, enough to immobilize a small animal. You part your hair with mathematical precision and smooth it down until your scalp could serve as a runway for beetles. Sideburns are trimmed and combed, mustaches waxed, and every whisker is expected to salute politely. Anything less, and you might as well wear a burlap sack to the opera. Finally, you take a deep breath, careful not to wrinkle your shirt front, and prepare to greet the evening. Social gatherings are an exercise in restraint and ritual. Bow, nod, shake hands, gloves on naturally, and exchange pleasantries that never risk genuine emotion. You glide around the room with practiced ease, praying your cravat doesn't unravel and your monocle doesn't leap to its death in the soup course. Dancing is a test of posture and self-control. One misplaced step and you could flatten a debutante's bustle or send your top hat spinning under the grand piano. Dinner conversation is another minefield, where the wrong anecdote can exile you to the edge of the guest list for the entire season. You must maintain an air of perfect composure, no sweating, no stumbling, no complaints about your shoes. If you feel faint, you simply take a turn on the balcony and hope for a breeze. As the evening winds down, you retreat home, exhausted but impeccably turned out. Every button, every pleat, every fleck of pomade still in place. Because in Victorian society, the measure of a man isn't in his character, but in the perfection of his evening attire and his ability to look composed, even while internally screaming for the sweet release of elastic waistbands and slippers. Accessories are half the battle. A well-chosen fan can save you from a fainting spell, while a cane is perfect for gesturing grandly or poking at stray dogs on the street. The world of Victorian accessories is vast, imaginative, and sometimes just a little bit ridiculous. In this era, it's not enough to simply survive the corsets, bustles, hats, and gloves. Your ensemble is incomplete without a constellation of accoutrements that communicate your status, taste, and preparedness for any social emergency, including but not limited to sudden fires, courtship opportunities, or the appearance of someone you'd rather avoid. Let's begin with the fan. For ladies, the fan is much more than a pretty bit of lace or painted paper. It's a vital survival tool, especially if you've spent the afternoon tightly laced into a dress and forced to pretend you're not sweating like a bakery window in August. With a subtle flick, a lady can signal her interest, hide a blush, or even send coded messages to a suitor across the room. There's a whole language of the fan. In case socializing wasn't complicated enough already, fans are also useful for self-defense, redirecting candle smoke, and if you're desperate, swatting away an overzealous relative. Gentlemen, meanwhile, wield the cane. Ostensibly a walking aid, but in truth a multi-purpose accessory. A cane is for leaning, twirling, or tapping impatiently while waiting for someone to finish buttoning their 100th button. It's a prop in a dramatic story, a pointer for mapping out your land holdings, and, on a bad day, an emergency umbrella, fruit poker, or even a makeshift sword. Some canes even have hidden compartments for snuff, alcohol, or, because Victorian England never passed up an opportunity for espionage, a tiny, entirely impractical pistol. The real challenge is not poking a hole in your own trousers, or sending a small dog into orbit. Pockets deserve a special mention. While men enjoyed generous jacket pockets, suitable for stashing watches, coins, cigars, and half the London Times, women's dresses were notoriously pocketless. Instead, the secret pocket was born, a small, often detachable pouch called a reticule, dangling from the wrist like a decorative fruit. This could hold a handkerchief, a calling card, or perhaps a sugar cube for emergencies. The lack of real pockets has been the source of centuries of female frustration. But it did lead to the artful development of concealed compartments in bustles, parasols, and if you were really creative, under your hat. Handkerchiefs are another essential, used for dabbing away tears, real or strategic, waving at departing carriages, or fluttering to the ground in hopes of starting a romantic conversation. The handkerchief was a powerful social tool. A lady might embroider hers with her initials, a favourite flower, or a discreet reminder not to sneeze too forcefully in public. Then there's jewellery, brooches, cameos, lockets, pocket watches, cufflinks, each carefully chosen for the time of day and the occasion. A locket might contain a lock of hair from a loved one, or if you're feeling dramatic, a beloved poodle. Brooches fasten shawls, but also serve as miniature family crests, political statements, or, in a pinch, hairpins for the truly desperate. For the well-prepared, accessories extended to smelling salts, for reviving oneself or others at the dinner table, card cases for the ever-important calling cards, and snuff boxes, a little pinch of powdered tobacco to distract from the overwhelming aroma of unwashed Victorians. And finally, the umbrella, part shield, part fashion statement, and always at the ready for a sudden London downpour or a sudden need to poke at puddles. In the end, accessories are about more than utility. They're about being prepared for everything society and the weather and your relatives might throw at you. In Victorian England, a person without accessories is like a cake without icing. Technically complete, but missing all the fun. So next time you get dressed, don't forget your fan, your cane, and your secret pocket. You never know when you'll need to feint, gesture, or smuggle a sugar cube to safety. With every layer worn comes the dread of laundry day. Scrubbing out grass, stains, and coal dust is an ordeal that makes you question all your life choices. Laundry in the Victorian era isn't just a chore, it's an endurance trial, a minor community event, and a guaranteed way to discover which of your clothes secretly hates you. Every week, or for the truly unlucky, every few days, you must face the music. Everything you've worn, sweated in, spilled tea on, and dragged through the mud has to be restored to its original, almost clean condition. The process begins at dawn, when the air is still brisk and full of promise. That promise quickly vanishes the moment you see the mountain of clothing awaiting its fate. You gather shirts, shifts, petticoats, collars, socks, trousers, drawers, aprons, and an alarming number of handkerchiefs. Each item must be sorted according to colour, level of filth, and the likelihood that it will disintegrate if you so much as look at it the wrong way. The first step is soaking. Everything is plunged into large tubs of cold water to loosen the stains, but really just to ensure your fingers are numb by breakfast. Next comes scrubbing, performed with wooden boards, stiff brushes, and the sort of gritty soap that feels like a personal attack. Coal dust, grass, and mysterious street sludge are relentless foes. Victorian soap, made from lye, ashes, and the faint hopes of tired laundry maids, bites into your knuckles as you battle each garment, hoping to make it merely acceptable instead of actively hazardous. For the truly unlucky, there's also the art of boiling. Some whites must be cooked in enormous pots to achieve that radiant, almost alarming brightness that Victorian society expects. If you think boiling laundry is as simple as making soup, think again. You're wrangling sheets and shifts with a wooden paddle, dodging splatters of scalding water, and all the while inhaling a heady mix of lye fumes and existential despair. If you survive with your eyebrows intact, consider it a win. Stain removal is its own dramatic saga. Grass stains on a petticoat? Time to reach for lemon juice, salt, or whatever folk remedy your grandmother swears by. Coal on a collar? Prepare to do battle with vinegar, sand, or perhaps a desperate prayer. Blood, ink, or wax. Accept defeat and consider fashioning a new accessory to cover the evidence. Once everything is at least slightly cleaner, you begin the rinse, a process requiring buckets of cold water and more arm strength than you possess. Rinsing is never truly complete. There's always a lingering suspicion that soap remains, lurking, ready to sting the skin at the first sign of sweat. Next comes wringing out the water, which, without the aid of modern conveniences, means twisting, squeezing, and occasionally wrestling garments into submission. Your hands are raw, your back aches, and you've developed muscles in places you didn't know existed. If it's winter, your fingers threaten to freeze off. If it's summer, you'll sweat enough to need a second round of laundry by noon. Drying is no simple affair either. Clothes are hung in neat rows in the garden, across hedges, or strung throughout the kitchen if it's raining. Every gust of wind threatens to carry away your best chemise, and every passing bird seems determined to bless your efforts. Finally, ironing. Irons are heated on the stove and must be wielded with the precision of a blacksmith and the delicacy of a pastry chef. Scorch marks, unfortunately, are a common hazard, as is burning yourself on a handle that only moments ago looked perfectly harmless. By the end of laundry day, you've spent hours, maybe even the whole day, scrubbing, boiling, rinsing, wringing, drying, and ironing. Your clothes are clean-ish, your hands are ruined, and your spirit is somewhere between defeated and resigned. But you've survived, and so have your petticoats, at least until tomorrow's mud puddle. Victorian laundry day. Proof that nothing says fashion quite like suffering. The latest colours and fabrics come at a price. Green dresses might kill you, arsenic. Purple dyes could make you faint, and hat decorations sometimes explode in the rain. Fashion is pain, sometimes literally fatal. Let's begin with green. In the Victorian era, green wasn't just a colour, it was a status symbol. The more vivid and jewel-like your gown, the more people knew you were not just fashionable but cutting edge. Enter Shields green, a bright, dazzling shade that made everything from evening gowns to wallpaper glow with poisonous pride. What the fashion-forward set didn't know, or pretended not to know, was that this gorgeous hue was laced with arsenic. Yes, the same stuff you'd use to poison your least favourite cousin was woven right into the very fabric of your party dress. And we're not talking trace amounts. Some ball gowns were so thoroughly infused that after a night of dancing, wearers would develop rashes, blisters, and sometimes even more alarming symptoms like hair loss or persistent coughing. Medical journals warned of arsenical dust floating off dresses and settling on the skin, or, more worryingly, floating up noses. Suddenly, dropping dead at the ball wasn't just a metaphor for embarrassment. Green wasn't the only danger lurking in your wardrobe. The Victorians adored new chemical dyes, and the mid-century arrival of mauve, synthesized from coal tar, set off a frenzy. Women flocked to dressmakers to buy the latest shade of mauveine, not realizing the dye could leach out in the heat or after a little too much waltzing, leaving behind stains, dizziness, and, in some cases, outright fainting spells. Purple was the color of royalty, but too much of it, and you could end up flat on your back, regally unconscious. Then there's red, a shade achieved with mercuric nitrate, which was especially beloved for hats. If you were feeling particularly daring, you might accessorize with a feather or artificial flower, both liberally soaked in chemicals to ensure they kept their color through storms, dances, and jealous rivals' side-eye. But here's the catch. When these decorations got wet, say, caught in a sudden London downpour, they could react and, on occasion, combust. Yes, exploding hat syndrome was rare, but it was enough of a concern to earn its own columns in the penny press. Imagine stepping out to impress the neighbours, only to have your hat burst into flames like a particularly stylish firework. Men weren't immune. The iconic top hat, especially the glossy black ones, owed their shine to mercury-based treatments. Hatters, the original Mad Hatters, suffered terrible health effects, tremors, hallucinations, and in severe cases, death, just to keep men looking sharp for the opera. If your head felt hot, dizzy, or started seeing double, it might be the start of a very bad night. Even children weren't safe. Little girls' frocks and boys' sashes were dyed in the same poisonous shades as their parents. Kids who chewed on their sleeves or sucked their cuffs could ingest alarming quantities of arsenic, mercury, or lead, turning playtime into a real-life chemistry experiment. Yet, despite the warnings, the allure of colour was too powerful. Fashion magazines gushed about emerald silk and mauve muslin, while etiquette guides simply advised against licking your gloves or nibbling your scarf. Doctors called for reforms, but chemical dyes continued to dominate. It was the price of progress, and a social season wasn't complete without at least one scandal involving a rash, a faint, or a hat that didn't make it home in one piece. So you swirl into a ballroom, aglow in all the latest hues, a living rainbow of danger. Every brush of your skirt, every sweep of your sleeve is a reminder. In Victorian society, you suffered for beauty, and sometimes beauty suffered right back. The dangers of dye, proof that a little colour goes a long way, sometimes all the way to the emergency physician. But at least you looked sensational while running the risk. Even children aren't spared. Tiny corsets, miniature suits, and rules about how many ruffles are acceptable on a toddler. It's never too early to start suffering for style. From the moment a Victorian child draws their first breath, they are swept into a world of fabric, frills, and frankly, fashion-related trauma. Childhood is supposed to be a time of running free, climbing trees, and getting gloriously filthy. In Victorian England, it's more a matter of holding still while someone attempts to fasten a bow the size of your head onto the back of your pinafore. Every day begins with a game of dress-up, except it's mandatory, uncomfortable, and enforced by mothers armed with straight pins and a deep sense of social obligation. Let's start with the basics. Babies. Even newborns are bundled in yards of cotton, linen, and lace. Swaddled into tiny gowns, bonnets, and long socks, they resemble elaborately decorated cakes more than actual humans. The goal is to keep them looking angelic and draft-free. Never mind that their arms and legs are effectively immobilized. If the family is wealthy enough, there might even be embroidered initials on every item, just in case anyone needs to confirm the baby's identity at a glance, or judge the quality of the embroidery. As soon as children can toddle, the fashion rules get stricter. Boys and girls alike spend their early years in dresses and petticoats. Yes, even boys. It's easier for diaper changes and, more importantly, provides endless opportunities for mothers to add extra ruffles, ribbons, and hand-stitched embellishments. By the age of 5 or 6, boys graduate to breeching, a celebrated occasion when they finally get their first pair of trousers. There might be cake, applause, and the faint hope that now, at last, the itching will stop. Spoiler, it doesn't. Girls, meanwhile, are inducted early into the mysteries of the corset. Not the full Iron Maiden version worn by their mothers, but training corsets, designed to gently but relentlessly prepare them for the day when breathing will become a luxury and fainting will be expected at social events. Petticoats and pinafores are layered on top, forming a soft, frilly barrier between the child and any hope of athletic achievement. Running is possible, but only if your nanny isn't watching. Climbing trees? Only in stories. Rolling down hills? Not unless you're prepared for hours of brushing out grass stains and explaining yourself to Aunt Prudence. For special occasions, children don even more elaborate outfits. Sailor suits with itchy collars, velvet jackets with 20 buttons, miniature waistcoats and gloves for boys, crinoline-light dresses for girls. Everything is tied, fastened, and stitched so tightly you wonder if any Victorian child ever managed to grow without just popping a seam. Hats are non-negotiable, and must be fastened with ribbons or pins that seem specifically designed to poke you behind the ears at the most inopportune moments. Shoes are another trial. Stiff, narrow, and almost certainly 2 sizes too small, fashion dictates that feet should appear dainty, regardless of actual anatomy. They're buckled tightly and shined until you can see your reflection in them. By the end of a single walk, there are blisters, tears, and sometimes the quiet hope that barefoot peasantry might not be so bad after all. And let's not forget etiquette. Children must know exactly how many ruffles are acceptable, too few, and you're accused of neglect. Too many, and you risk being called vulgar. Colours are carefully chosen for the season, and one misstep in fabric choice could doom you to a week of whispers at Sunday school. Yet, despite all this, children somehow find ways to rebel. The most popular childhood game isn't tag. It's hiding in a hedge and pulling off your bonnet the moment no one's looking. They roll up their sleeves, lose their shoes in the mud, and, if they're lucky, escape to the kitchen for a stolen biscuit and a rare, blissful moment of comfort. In the end, Victorian fashion for children is proof that style knows no age limit, and that it's never too early to start suffering for the approval of your elders. At least the photos will look nice. No air conditioning, no central heating, just layer after layer of misery. In the summer, you boil. In the winter, you freeze in fashion-forward silence. Let's begin with the summer. Victorian England is famous for its fog, but every now and then, the sun breaks through and unleashes a heat wave that turns London into a gently simmering stew. You'd think this would be the moment to toss off a few layers, but no, fashion is relentless. Out come the starched collars, the multiple petticoats, the black silk hats that function as portable ovens. The ideal is to remain pale, calm, and completely unbothered, even as sweat drips down your back, pooling in places you never knew existed. Fans become a lifeline. You clutch yours with desperate grace, wafting air towards your face while trying not to reveal that your corset is quickly becoming a slow cooker for ribs. Perfume is applied with increasing generosity. By noon, you and everyone around you have transformed into walking bouquets with the faint undertone of human stew. Etiquette guides suggest taking the air during the hottest hours, which is code for sit in the one shady spot you can find and quietly melt. Men don't have it much easier. A waistcoat, jacket, and heavy trousers in the July sun quickly turn every gentleman into a human teapot. Top hats trap heat, sweat soaks into cravats, and even the stiffest mustache wax begins to droop in protest. Removing a jacket in public? Scandalous. Rolling up your sleeves? Unthinkable. So you simply bake, quietly, stoically, and with all the dignity that can be mustered while secretly daydreaming about skinny dipping in the nearest horse trough. Then comes winter. If summer is a slow roast, winter is the ultimate freeze-dry. The cold creeps into houses through every ill-fitting window, and the family fire struggles valiantly to warm anyone not sitting directly in the hearth. Your first defense is, of course, more layers. Woolen underthings, extra stockings, and for the truly desperate, a flannel chest protector that looks suspiciously like a homemade sandwich board. Women double up on petticoats, add shawls, and brave the icy blast with only a thin veil of hope, and maybe a little whiskey, if Aunt Agatha's not looking. Hands are stuffed into muffs. Feet are encased in boots, lined with, well, anything you can find that isn't already being used as a draft excluder. Hats grow wider, scarves longer, and capes become as common as complaints about the weather. Outside, the cold is unrelenting. Streets freeze, boots slip, and every breath turns into a tiny, fleeting cloud of despair. Fashion does not care. You are expected to arrive at every engagement looking crisp, clean, and not at all like you just skidded half a block on black ice. Gloves are essential, leather for show, wool for warmth, both for sanity. If you're a child, you're bundled so thoroughly you can barely move, which is perhaps the only time in Victorian life when it's impossible to get into trouble. Inside, the battle continues. Bedtime is an exercise in preparation. Hot water bottles are filled, bricks are heated in the stove and wrapped in flannel, and every available blanket is stacked high. You sleep in your nightcap, your socks, and, if you're wise, most of your day clothes too. The only thing colder than your feet is your resolve not to let anyone see you shiver. Seasonal suffering is the Victorian birthright. There's no relief, just new strategies for surviving another day without fainting from heatstroke or losing a toe to frostbite. You sweat, you shiver, but through it all, you remain perfectly, fashionably composed, because if there's one thing worse than freezing or boiling, it's being caught out of style while you do it. In the end, whether it's summer swelter or winter frostbite, the layers might change, but the misery and the commitment to looking good through it all remains the same. Before you even put on clothes, you're trapped in an endless spiral of shifts, draws, stays, and chemises. It's like dressing for battle, but the enemy is yourself. It all begins with the shift or chemise, a simple, ankle-length underdress, usually made of linen or cotton, that serves as a soft, slightly scratchy buffer between your skin and the army of starched, whalebone-reinforced, and occasionally weaponized garments to come. The shift is theoretically there for your comfort, but comfort, in the Victorian era, is a relative term. It's also there to absorb sweat, protect expensive outer garments, and, perhaps most importantly, allow for easy laundering, since actual washing of dresses is an ordeal best not undertaken more than absolutely necessary. Over the shift come the drawers, the original awkwardly baggy bloomers. Forget anything even vaguely glamorous. Victorian drawers are roomy, ruffled, and often open at the crotch for reasons best left to your imagination and the limitations of 19th century plumbing. You pull them on, tie them at the waist, and try to ignore the feeling that you're preparing to parachute into a tea party. Next, the stays. Stays are the gentle, polite ancestor of the corset, or at least that's what they want you to think. Their job is to provide support and shape to your figure, smoothing everything into the socially acceptable silhouette, narrow waist, straight back, and a chest positioned at attention. Stays can be laced tightly or loosely, depending on the occasion, your level of optimism, and whether you plan on breathing before dinner. The sound of the laces tightening, the gentle pressure on your ribs, and the slow compression of your internal organs combine to remind you that you are, in fact, just a visitor in your own body. Now, for petticoats, the foundation of any respectable outfit. The first petticoat adds warmth and modesty. The second adds volume. By the third, you're convinced you've joined a Victorian fitness regime. Squats are built into your every movement, and simply sitting down requires a 3-step plan and an exit strategy. The petticoats are heavy, but they're also your secret weapon against drafts, prying eyes, and the occasional passing rat. Men are not spared. Their undergarments start with a long, loose linen shirt, which also doubles as nightwear, convenient, if slightly unhygienic, then drawers or long johns. The shirt must be tucked into trousers with military precision, and the drawers, often knee-length and buttoned at the waistband, ensure that even the coldest mornings are met with at least one thin layer of hope. For extra warmth in winter, men add flannel undershirts, a garment that exists solely to ensure that no man ever feels truly comfortable in his own skin. Let's not forget the corset cover, a soft cotton layer worn over the corset to smooth out any lines and prevent your expensive dress fabric from being chewed up by steel boning. And of course, the modesty panel, a triangular piece of cloth that sits between stays and bodice, ensuring not a hint of skin is glimpsed by anyone who isn't legally obligated to see it. Finally, stockings, wool in winter, silk in summer, rolled up and secured with garters that never, ever stay up unless you tie them with the stubborn determination of a sailor knotting his last rope. Some days, you spend more time hoisting stockings than actually walking in them. By the end of this epic undergarment odyssey, you've added anywhere from 4 to 8 pounds of fabric to your person, lost feeling in your toes, and developed a new appreciation for modern underwear. The ordeal is far from over. You haven't even started on petticoats, bodices, and bustles, but you're technically dressed. Victorian undergarments. Proof that sometimes the first step to being fashionable is losing a wrestling match with your own wardrobe. And you haven't even put on your outer clothes yet. At the end of the day, you peel off each layer with a mixture of relief and existential exhaustion. You're left pondering how anyone survived the 19th century without just running off to join the circus in their pajamas. It's late, The last candle sputters out. Your social obligations are finally finished, and all that stands between you and bed is the gauntlet of Victorian undressing. What began 12 hours ago as a complicated engineering project in lace, whalebone and buttons now must be reversed, ideally without collapsing in a heap or waking the rest of the household with your triumphant sighs. You begin with the outermost layer, shawl, cape or cloak, carefully hung up to dry after hours of braving the elements, or more likely someone else's parlour. Hats are next, unglued from your scalp, pried free of a dozen hat pins, and inspected for any wildlife that might have joined the ride home. Next, your gloves come off one finger at a time, like peeling a reluctant orange, and are set aside to air out. The gentle thwack as they hit the table is the soundtrack of victory. Now you confront the real challenge, the dress itself. Victorian dresses are masterpieces of construction, but they are also fortresses. Buttons run up the back, sometimes in rows of 20 or 30, each smaller than a raisin and twice as difficult to manage. If you're lucky, there's a maid or sibling to help. If not, you develop the shoulder flexibility of a circus acrobat just trying to escape. Each button that gives way feels like another link broken in your chain of sartorial servitude. After the dress comes the bustle, a padded, wired contraption that has been your constant companion all day, announcing your presence in every doorway and chair. Removing it is like letting out the breath you didn't know you'd been holding. Petticoats follow, one by one, each falling to the floor with a soft, exhausted thud. By the third or fourth, you've lost track and wonder briefly if your skirt has been secretly reproducing all afternoon. And then, the corset. This is not so much a garment as a shared trauma. You fumble for the laces, hands numb from the day's work, and slowly unthread them, feeling your ribs expand for the first time since breakfast. If you're alone, it's a delicate operation. If you're helped, it's still not exactly graceful. The unbinding is equal parts relief and mild panic. What if your organs have gotten too used to being in the wrong places? But then you inhale, deeply, gloriously, and realize you might live to see another day. Stockings are rolled down, garters unfastened after only 3 tries, and drawers are untied and stepped out of with the elegance of a sleep-deprived penguin. Chemise and shift are the final barriers, and suddenly, after an eternity of undressing, you're left in just your nightgown, a simple, billowing thing that feels like wearing freedom itself. For men, the process is no less complicated, if slightly less suffocating. Cravat is untied with a sigh of gratitude, starched collar removed, waistcoat peeled away like a particularly judgmental onion. Boots, shoes, and garters are tugged off, leaving behind red marks and memories of battles lost to leather and polish. The final layer, the long shirt, doubles as nightwear. You stand for a moment, stretching, finally unencumbered, your body readjusting to the radical concept of unrestricted movement. As you slip into bed, the softness of the mattress is almost shocking. The air is cooler, your limbs lighter, and you are, at last, just you again. No buttons, no laces, no need to hold in your stomach or fears of public disgrace. You reflect on the absurdity and tenacity of 19th century fashion, on the daily ritual of constructing and deconstructing yourself to meet the standards of a society obsessed with layers. You close your eyes, grateful for flannel, for nightcaps, and for the glorious simple bliss of being comfortable. Victorian undressing. The slow, sweet descent into a freedom that, by now, you've more than earned. Victorians took mourning to extremes you can barely imagine. When someone died, your wardrobe instantly transformed into a fabric-based black hole. There are rules for how many months you must look like a fashionable vampire, which kinds of crepe to swaddle yourself in, and whether your veil should be dramatic enough to double as a mosquito net. Don't smile. Don't wear buttons that sparkle. And whatever you do, don't forget your mourning handkerchief, so everyone knows you're sad, but still stylish. The first thing to know about Victorian mourning, it's not just a mood, it's a lifestyle. The moment the sad news arrives, your daily routine is interrupted by a flurry of activity. Not for emotional comfort, but for assembling an outfit that would make even a bat jealous. Everyone from your great-aunt to the postman expects you to observe the correct period and style of mourning, or risk being condemned as insensitive, improper, or worst of all, French. The rules are mercilessly specific. Immediate family? You're in deep mourning, the strictest and most exhausting category, for at least a year. This means every visible inch of your body must be draped in matte black fabrics. Wool, bombazine, alpaca, and above all, crepe, a crunchy, wrinkly textile that absorbs light and hope in equal measure. No jewelry, except for jet, onyx, or hairwork locks of the deceased's hair, lovingly woven into something you can pin to your chest. Yes, really. And don't even think about cutting corners. The hem of your dress must brush the ground in a funereal sweep. Your bonnet is now a shadowy halo, and your veil? It must hang so low and thick that you could safely witness a solar eclipse without risking your retinas. Some widows swore their veils protected them from unwanted advances and street dust, while others likely just used them to sneak a nap during long sermons. Next comes second mourning, when, after a prescribed number of months, or years, if you're truly committed, you're permitted to introduce fabrics with a little shine, silk, perhaps, but nothing too cheerful. You can finally add a whisper of white or lavender, a colour so pale it's basically the absence of joy. If anyone notices you lightening up too soon, expect gossip, judgment, and perhaps a pointed mention in someone's diary. For men, the process is slightly less complicated, but only because they own fewer clothes to begin with. A black suit, black gloves, black cravat, and a black hat band are all required, and woe betide any gentleman who appears in anything brighter than a wet crow. A subtle black armband might suffice if the deceased was only a distant cousin, but for a parent or spouse, you are expected to enter a state of monochrome hibernation. Children aren't spared either. Tiny black frocks, miniature mourning bonnets, and pint-sized gloves are a must, making even playtime look like a Gothic tea party. The family pet may or may not be roped into the ritual. Historical records are unclear, but one suspects at least a few unfortunate dogs were forced to sport a black ribbon for the cause. Social life, of course, comes to a grinding halt. Dances, theatre visits, and anything resembling fun are cancelled. You exchange calling cards with a sombre black border. Conversations become hushed, and laughter, if it happens at all, must be disguised as a cough. If someone catches you smiling, you're not just suspected of being heartless, but possibly of plotting your next wedding. When mourning finally lifts, it's with the cautious joy of someone emerging from a particularly stylish cave. The first glimpse of colour, soft grey maybe, or mauve, feels almost scandalous. You store your mourning wardrobe in the attic, knowing it may soon return. In the end, Victorian mourning attire is less about grief and more about performance. You may be heartbroken, or just mildly inconvenienced, but your outfit announces to the world that you feel everything, 7 layers deep and perfectly accessorized. And should you shed a tear, rest assured, your mourning handkerchief is standing by, ready to catch it in inky, stylish silence. You thought fans were just for cooling down in overstuffed drawing rooms? Think again. In Victorian society, a flutter of the wrist could say more than 1,000 words, or at least more than anyone wanted to say out loud. Wave your fan a certain way and you're signalling affection, snap it shut, and you're declaring emotional bankruptcy. The trick is not accidentally telling someone you love them when you're just trying to swat a fly. Let's begin at the heart of every stifling ballroom, where a symphony of lace, ivory, and feathers is constantly in motion. The fan, in all its decorative glory, is not just an accessory, it's an instrument of subtle power, capable of transmitting everything from shy invitations to categorical rejections without ever uttering a sound. Forget texting. Victorian ladies had their own analog emojis, and they required a level of wrist flexibility rarely seen outside of competitive sports. The language of the fan is a system so elaborate, it could only have been invented by a society determined to never say what it actually means. There are manuals, diagrams, and even etiquette classes on how to flutter, flick, and twirl a fan without inviting scandal or accidentally declaring a duel. For example, drawing the fan slowly across your cheek means, "I love you." Placing it over your left ear means, "I wish to get rid of you." Rest assured, there are dozens of other signals, each one more likely to cause confusion than resolve it. The pressure is immense. Imagine you're just trying to cool down after your sixth poker, and you absent-mindedly drop your fan depending on who's watching. You might have just agreed to elope or suggested someone's cravat is out of fashion. It's a communication minefield. Meanwhile, mothers look on in horror, ready to pounce the moment a daughter fans herself a little too briskly. Careful, Edith. You'll have half the room proposing by dessert. Of course, there's more to fans than just courtship intrigue. They're also vital for survival. Ballrooms are famously airless, crammed with bodies, layered in wool, velvet, and whalebone, lit by candles and warmed by the collective energy of suppressed emotions. A well-made fan is your only hope for avoiding a fainting spell and the embarrassment of being carried out by the footman petticoats akimbo. Then there's the artistry. Fans are hand-painted, adorned with mother-of-pearl, and sometimes studded with tiny gemstones. They're small enough to fit in a reticule, but large enough to hide an entire blush or a bout of giggles. Some are even equipped with secret compartments for notes, flowers, or a discreet sniff of smelling salts, because you never know when someone's dance card will turn out to be truly shocking. Men, of course, pretend to ignore all of this, claiming not to understand the fan's language. This is a tactical lie. Every bachelor worth his salt knows to watch the movements closely, ready to leap into action at the first sign of, "I wish to be introduced," and to beat a hasty retreat at, "You are being watched. Please leave." It's the Victorian version of social media, but with fewer trolls and slightly more danger of being whacked on the knuckles for misinterpretation. The fan's magic is not just in what it says, but in what it doesn't. Sometimes it's simply a tool for buying time, pausing behind its flutter to compose a reply, hide a laugh, or block an awkward glance. In a world where direct communication was frowned upon, the fan gave you plausible deniability, wrapped in silk and a cloud of perfume. By the end of the evening, your wrist aches, your mind is spinning with mixed signals, and you've narrowly avoided declaring your undying love to 3 strangers and a potted fern. The fan closes with a snap, signaling, "I am done with this nonsense," and you sweep from the room, cool, mysterious, and slightly bewildered by the complex ballet of Victorian flirtation. In Victorian England, love was rarely spoken, but often fanned. For Victorian men, the face was not a blank canvas. It was a competitive hedge maze of hair, from mutton-chop sideburns to moustaches waxed within an inch of their lives. The era's top trend was, the more hair, the better. Every gentleman wanted a look that screamed, "I am both dignified and potentially hiding snacks in my beard." And yes, there were products, gadgets, and even health warnings about facial hair that got out of control. The 19th century male had a wealth of options, and most of them required serious commitment. The clean-shaven look was for schoolboys, actors, and the extremely avant-garde. Everyone else was expected to cultivate a facial landscape so impressive it could double as wildlife habitat. A good set of mutton-chop sideburns marked you as a man of means, taste, and probably access to a very bored barber. The bushier the better, ideally, wide enough to provide shade for your jaw and at least one passing squirrel. Then there were the moustaches, which could be grown to preposterous lengths, curled, waxed, and sometimes shaped into architectural wonders. Some gents preferred the imperial, which looked like a pair of very serious eyebrows perched above your lip, or the handlebar, beloved by circus strongmen and men who wished to convey both whimsy and mild intimidation. Wax was an absolute necessity. The morning routine involved melting a little tin of pomade over a candle, dipping the tips of your moustache, and then twirling and pinching until your reflection looked suitably menacing or dashing, or, if you were unlucky, both at once. Beards were another field of fierce competition. The full Lord Kitchener was favoured by generals and gentlemen who wanted to keep their chins both warm and mysterious. Some beards were trimmed to neat points, others allowed to flow freely, billowing out of shirt collars like an ambitious cloud. There was the chin curtain, the friendly mutton, and, of course, the Dundreary, a style that made it possible to store an entire picnic under your left cheek. It's rumoured that some men kept small combs hidden in their waistcoat pockets, ready for on-the-spot grooming emergencies. After all, nothing ruined a morning like having your beard outshine your cravat. The upkeep was relentless. Shampoos, oils and pomades filled every gentleman's washstand, promising to soften, shine and deodorize. Hairbrushes, combs, and the dreaded curling iron, yes, really, could be pressed into service. Periodicals of the era were filled with advice on taming rebellious whiskers, warnings about the dangers of letting facial hair grow wild, and breathless reports of the latest beard contests, which were every bit as serious as sporting events, if not more so. Of course, where there is hair, there are hazards. Victorian doctors began to fret about beard hygiene, warning that a poorly maintained moustache could harbour crumbs, ink stains, or even the odd insect. There were stories of men losing entire meals in their beards, only to discover them hours later, proof, if any were needed, that a hearty soup was both a blessing and a curse. Public health notices cautioned against kissing bearded men unless you were prepared for a light exfoliation and possibly a new pet. Then came the gadgets. Moustache cups with special ledges to protect your precious curls from tea, tiny personal scissors for snipping split ends on the go, and even beard nets for sleeping, so you wouldn't wake up with half your beard stuck to your pillow or, worse, your spouse. Gentlemen's clubs employed their own beard valets, professionals whose only job was to maintain the facial foliage of the elite. In the end, facial hair was more than fashion, it was identity, rivalry, and sometimes outright comedy. The bigger, bushier, and more elaborate, the better. Victorian men wore their facial hair like knights wore armour, with pride, bravado, and just a hint of underlying anxiety about losing a duel with the next passing breeze. So next time you see an old photograph of a man bristling with whiskers, remember, you're not just looking at a beard, you're looking at history's greatest, hairiest arms race. Walking down the street with a parasol was less about protecting your delicate complexion and more about making a statement. These ornate, frilly umbrellas were wielded like weapons in the unending battle for social dominance and personal space. Spotted using the wrong parasol for the weather, you'd risk social exile. Used correctly, though, and you might just fend off sunburn, small dogs, or an over-enthusiastic suitor with a single well-timed swoosh. To truly understand the Victorian parasol, you must picture a street crowded with ladies and gentlemen, all jostling for status and elbow room. In this world, pale skin is the gold standard. Tanned hands mean you've been toiling in the fields, not languidly sipping lemonade in the conservatory. The parasol becomes your shield against the sun and society, signalling to everyone within swooshing distance that you are both delicate and devastatingly fashionable. But not just any parasol will do. They come in a dizzying variety of styles, colours and sizes, each carefully chosen for the time of day, the occasion, and even the forecast. Morning stroll? Pale pastel silk, perhaps with delicate lace and subtle embroidery, making it clear you are a gentle soul who would never raise your voice in public. Afternoon promenade? Switch to a more substantial fabric, perhaps ivory, with mother-of-pearl inlays and a handle so ornate you could use it to conduct an orchestra, should the mood strike. If the sun is blazing, an extra-wide, double-frilled model provides both shade and a built-in excuse for not recognizing people you'd rather avoid. Of course, woe betide anyone caught with the wrong parasol at the wrong time. To show up at a garden party with a mourning parasol, black crepe, sombre fringe, was to instantly invite whispers, side-eyes, and possibly a lifetime ban from lemonade tables. Parasols, like hats, gloves, and shoes, must obey the rules. Forgetting which is social quicksand, and there's always a keen-eyed matron waiting to pounce on your mistake. Carrying a parasol is not for the faint of heart. There is technique involved. You must carry it at just the right angle to maximize your shade, but also be ready to deploy it as a barrier against unwanted attention or, should the occasion arise, a nosy neighbor's dog. If a rival appears on the sidewalk, parasol etiquette can devolve into a gentle but determined game of chicken. Who will yield and who will press forward with the confidence of a fencing champion? The sidewalks are narrow, but your will is strong. Occasionally, parasols tangle, requiring both parties to untwist their respective accessories with a tense, silent truce. Suitors, of course, view parasols as both obstacle and opportunity. A lady who allows a gentleman to hold her parasol just for a moment is signaling a degree of trust and intimacy that might be considered practically scandalous by anyone watching. More often, the parasol is used as a shield, fending off overly familiar advances, or providing cover for whispered secrets and peals of laughter that might otherwise be overheard by a lurking chaperone. Children naturally see parasols as irresistible toys. They twirl, spin, and occasionally attempt to fly with them, to the horror of their elders and the delight of any passing urchins. The more ornate the parasol, the more likely it is to become an impromptu puppet stage, a makeshift tent, or, in times of extreme boredom, a very short-lived lance for sibling jousting matches. At the end of the day, your parasol has served as sunblock, shield, pointer, and social weapon. Your arm aches, your wrist is sore, and your patience for anyone questioning your parasol choices has evaporated. But you remain, through it all, pale, poised, and perfectly equipped for whatever Victorian society throws your way, be it sunshine, scandal, or another round of sidewalk dueling. Parasols, not just for shade, but for making sure you always have the upper hand. Or, at the very least, the last frilly word. So tonight, as you finally untangle yourself from imaginary petticoats and shake off the lingering ghost of a cravat, take a quiet moment to appreciate just how simple your pajamas are. The Victorians spent every waking hour, sometimes even their sleeping ones, stuffed, stitched, and squeezed into fashion so complicated it makes modern laundry feel like a vacation. They endured corsets that rearranged their insides, hats that doubled as weather vanes, shoes that declared war on toes, and more dress codes than a royal wedding. Yet, for all the suffering and daily inconveniences, there's something kind of admirable in their relentless pursuit of style, dignity, and social standing, even if it did mean risking a fainting spell in the queue for afternoon tea. The Victorians may have looked a bit ridiculous by today's standards, but they were, above all, resourceful, resilient, and absolutely committed to the bit. They navigated the hazards of arsenic-green dresses and explosive hats, survived laundry days best described as full-contact sports, and still managed to smile politely, probably because their corset wouldn't let them frown. So as you drift off tonight, warm and uncrinolined in your bed, maybe whisper a gentle thank you to those 19th century fashion pioneers. Thanks to their hardships, we can wear sneakers to the grocery store, elastic waistbands to dinner, and, best of all, own as many pockets as we want. History may be weird, itchy, and occasionally lethal, but it's a testament to the stubbornness, hope, and creativity of people everywhere. And if you ever feel embarrassed about your own fashion choices, just remember, nobody ever died from skinny jeans. Probably. Sleep well, and may your dreams be free of hatpins, bustle pads, and the eternal struggle for a decent pocket. Good night.